EA Sports. It's in the game.
Hello, the Internet Tough Monkey here. Hope you're all well. Thanks for stopping by. That's one of the most iconic gaming intros, isn't it? What was the first game you remember hearing that on? We all know who Electronic Arts are, and I'm sure you've got your own opinion of them. Whatever your preferred genre of gaming is, it's almost certain you've played a game that is in some way associated with them. Whether as a developer or a publisher, they've had their fingers in many pies. And perhaps more than any other company in gaming history, they're heavily associated with franchises. I can't think of any other company that has more established gaming franchises across so many genres. Need for Speed, Battlefield, Medal of Honor, Command & Conquer, Star Wars, The Sims, and of course through the EA Sports games you've got FIFA, NFL, NBA, NHL, PGA, UFC, F1 and WRC. That's a whole lot of acronyms right there. And other than microtransactions, EA are famous for their yearly updates, especially these EA Sports titles. Every year they'll wheel out the latest version of each franchise, which normally boils down to a roster update, marginal change to the gaming experience and a mildly polished user interface to make it at least look like a different game to the one you bought last year, just in the hope that it'll gloss over the fact that they're asking you for another, 60 to 100 quid for what's basically downloadable updates. Yeah, we keep buying them. EA's a Goliath of the company with a revenue of $7.5 billion. The gaming community will complain loudly on social media about their practices, but we keep buying their games and their DLC. Electronic Arts are incredibly successful for a reason. But do you know where this relentless succession of yearly updates started? We need to go all the way back to the start of the 1990s. Up until then, Electronic Arts were making mainly one-off games for DOS PCs, Amigas, Atari STs and Commodore 64s. Although a couple of titles appeared on these formats, it wasn't until the arrival of the 16-bit consoles, the Megadrive and the SNES, or the Genesis as it is in America, that EA found a platform that they could unleash this juggernaut that still rumbles on to this day. The Sega Megadrive was EA's preferred console. It saw the release of all of their major franchises first, sometimes followed by a port to the SNES. Now the SNES had a lot of fantastic games going for it, but the Sega console just seemed to be more suited to sports games, and the foundations were laid in the creation of the EA Sports brand in 1991. It seems that EA had so much love for the Megadrive that they continued to release yearly updates for their franchises long after it had been replaced by the Sega Saturn, right through to 1998. Beyond their sports games, the Megadrive was also home to other multi-sequel games such as Desert Strike and James Pond and Road Rash. Let's ignore F1 and WRC, which EA Sports owned through the acquisition of Codemasters in 2021, and UFC, which they only really did for the first time, I think it was 2014. Let's take a look at the big five. You've got Madden NFL, you've got PGA Tour Golf, you've got NBA, you've got NHL Hockey, and you've got, of course, FIFA. Madden was the original big title for EA. Although a game with the same name had appeared on DOS computers, Apple II and the Commodore 64 a few years earlier, the 1990 release of John Madden Football was a heavily revised and improved version and proved to be a huge success. So successful it took everyone by surprise, even EA themselves. It sold more than 5 times more copies than they'd expected to shift, helped by huge review scores in the all-important gaming magazines of the era, and it won the Best Console Game of the Year award at the Golden Joystick Awards. Perhaps even more surprisingly, it sold well outside of the US too. American football had very little interest at the time, especially in the UK where it was barely covered by any media outlet. This is long before the internet, this was. The success of the game led to the inevitable sequel John Madden Football 92 in late 1991. With the addition of new play modes and features plus the now ubiquitous roster update, it was a better game than the original, which some reviewers went as far to say was the best Mega Drive game of all time. There'd be one more John Madden Football title sequel in 93 before simply becoming Madden 94, which was also the first game to feature the now iconic
EA Sports. It's in the game.
Through to the last Madden 98. There'll be very few visual differences between all of these Madden games, only the user interface really truly telling them apart. Like most of the other games we'll look at, if you put all of these releases of Madden side by side, you'd struggle to tell which one was which. In the spring of 1991, PGA Tour Golf was ported over from DOS, Mac and Amiga systems over to the Sega Mega Drive, and then the following year, the SNES. Unlike Madden, the console version of PGA was very similar to computer versions. It came with 4 courses and had immense replay value. Now that was one of the very first games I ever bought on my Sega Mega Drive behind the original Sonic the Hedgehog and Super Monaco Grand Prix, and it continues to be one of the games I've played for the longest. It also marks a personal note for me that it was the only game that my dad and I have ever played together. Even some 30 years later, we've not played another computer game together. Now, PGA was highly regarded, especially on the Sega Megadrive, so well received that it spawned a Sega exclusive sequel, PGA Tour Golf 2, which added a couple more courses. 1994 oddly saw the release of two more sequels, PGA Tour Golf 3, which increased the number of courses to 8, and also PGA European Tour, which focused obviously on the European Tour with UK and European courses and players. The final PGA game to be released on the Sega Megadrive was PGA Tour 96. The game had been designed for the next generation PlayStation 3DO consoles, and the Megadrive did make a valiant effort at replicating the next gen graphics and animation. However, it was painfully slow redrawing every time the screen refreshed, and it just made the game practically unplayable. Another DOS port came in 1991, this time with the release of Lakers vs Celtic and the NBA Playoffs, very wordy title. This game was a side-scrolling basketball game featuring 8 teams from the 1990 NBA Playoffs and features signature moves from star players. The game was again well received by the review magazines, although it did become a little repetitive, so replay value was a bit limited. The following year saw the first NBA-related sequel with a near-identical Bulls vs Lakers in the NBA playoffs. Rosters were updated, the number of playable teams were doubled to 16, and a star underneath the player was introduced to make it easier to see who you were controlling. A second game was released in 1992 with Team USA Basketball to coincide with the Barcelona Olympic Games, so instead of NBA teams you could play the national sides. This third game in the series cashed in on both the popularity of the first two games and the explosion of interest around the USA's Dream Team squad, including Michael Jordan, Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, Charles Barkley, and also featuring David Robinson, who had his own rival David Robinson Supreme Court basketball game, also on the Sega Megadrive. The number of playable teams increased further the following year in Bulls vs Blazers and the NBA playoffs, making the first appearance of the EA Sports logo in the series, having previously been the EASN logo. From 1994 onwards, the playoff theme was dropped and the game became simply known as NBA. First with 94's NBA Showdown, which was the last of the side-to-side scrolling games, and then as NBA Live from 95 to 98, which changed to an isometric perspective as it ran on the same game engine as FIFA International Soccer. Again, as seen in the other series, the differences between all of the NBA Live games visually was very subtle. Yet another franchise began in 1991 for Electronic Arts with the arrival of NHL Hockey towards the end of the year. A little bit quirky this, and there are actually two near-identical games released at the same time. NHL Hockey was exclusive to North America, featuring the correct NHL teams. However, EA didn't have the license to use the NHL names elsewhere, so all other markets used international hockey teams instead, with the game known simply as EA Hockey. Other than the team names, the game is basically identical. It was also fantastic. Of all of the early EA sporting games, it's the one I found most fun with. Action was always fast and frantic, and even to this day it's the game I pick up and play when I just want to have 10 minutes to spare looking for a quick blast of something. The first sequel in this series came at the end of 1993 with NHLPA Hockey 93. The slight name change was because EA didn't have a license from the NHL for this game, only the Players Association. As such, team names were slightly changed and there's no NHL logos seen anywhere in the game. Other than that though, the game is very similar to the original. EA regained the NHL license the following year with the release of NHL 94. Not only regarded as the best hockey game ever made, but considered by some to be the best sporting game ever made. It's quite a claim that is, and I'm not sure I totally agree, but it does remain a fine game. NHL will continue to receive an annual sequel to the Sega Megadrive every year until its last appearance with NHL 98. Visually, this game was incredibly similar to the original 6 years previously, and looked very different to the next generation of consoles and my version on the PC, which I played to death when I was supposed to be doing my university work. NHL 98 was perhaps most famous for being the very last game with the legendary Wayne Gretzky appearing in it. The last of the major franchises to join the EA Sports roster in the Mega Drive era was, of course, FIFA International Soccer in December 1993. It'd be ported to pretty much every other available system the following year. The Mega Drive had been crying out for a decent football game, and EA more than delivered, despite not exactly being specialists in the beautiful game, or indeed understanding that outside of the US, we all call it football, not soccer. At the time, the king of the football games was sensible soccer followed by kickoff. Both viewing the pitch from a top-down perspective, FIFA made a big entrance with this unusual isometric view which would stay in place for the duration of the Mega Drive releases. The first game was limited to just national teams, but later releases would all include league teams as it grew into the colossus we now know. Despite the official licence, the early games were actually limited to fictional players' names. From the start, it always was great fun to play, fast-paced and had a lot of replay value. The original game was immensely successful and spawned its first sequel, FIFA Soccer 95, in late 1994, which was actually exclusive to the Sega Megadrive, and it remains the only FIFA game that has never appeared on a PC. FIFA 96 was the first to feature real player names, and also the first on the next generation of consoles, including the Sega Saturn and the Sony PlayStation. Despite the new consoles pushing the Mega Drive and SNES into obsolescence, EA will continue to release yearly updates, with FIFA 97 being the first to use EA's Virtual Stadium on the 32-bit consoles, but keeping the same isometric views on the 16-bit consoles. FIFA Road to the World Cup 98 was the last game on the Sega Mega Drive and SNES, focusing on the 1998 World Cup in France. It again lacked the 3D view of the gameplay, and also sadly lacked Blur's banging Song 2 as the intro music. Released in November 1997, a month after Madden 98, it would be the very last EA Sports game to be released on the Sega Mega Drive. The SNES version of the NHL 98 was a little bit behind the Mega Drive's release, and that would go on to be the EA Sports last game on the Nintendo. It's often forgotten what a huge impact these 16-bit consoles had on gaming, but EA's bank balances will remember them fondly, I'm sure. We've grown almost immune to this annual update of our favourite games, but back in the early to mid-90s they were big events and they meant something to gamers. I still play the original FIFA, EA Hockey and PGA Tour Golf even more so than the new releases. Now, not all retro games hold up well to the ravages of time, but I challenge you to play any one of these games and not have fun. And if you don't have fun playing those games, play Desert Strike or Road Rash. You'll certainly enjoy them. I'll see you on the next video. Take it easy.